People who think very deeply on subjects, when they become involved in politics, tend to be strategists because you can't get people to think very deeply. So they come up with programs of intelligence that allow their audience to keep a distance and jump to conclusions. Myths are very useful in politics to strategists. Look briefly at the incident in Dealey Plaza. There's a group of people who consider themselves informed. They've read several books, and so they know that Oswald was trained in Russian in Atsugi, Japan's secret Japanese air base. But they don't ask the relevant question: why Japan? Why Russian? Because all they've done is read books. They haven't pursued inquiry. We could make a day of this sometime, asking questions like why the name Oswald? Why was the rifle misrepresented as a Mauser? Why is Oswald's library card dated for the anniversary of Pearl Harbor? But these points of departures are scuttled. There's a myth about a woman named Diane Arbus. The myth that tells the story that she photographed, I guess they were mongoloids technically. I don't particularly like that word. And began to empathize with them so deeply that she began to become like one of them. She assimilated them. She was a Zelig character who simulated the personality of the people she studied. And she ended up committing suicide as though to devalue people with Down syndrome or something. There's another woman named Camelia Paglia who makes a case for child sexuality based on the mysteries of puberty and commends old men for getting it on with children. And she has a book called Sexual Personae, which, of course, is a point of departure for quite a few of the politically correct in culture wars, and lesbians for magical religion and so on. So what we see is a situation where the young and the restless in the 50s and 60s were baited into a situation that the church considered satanic, which was symbolized by songs like Revolution Number 9 and films like The Exorcist, and the situation that has brewed with Donald Trump and Jay Epstein, and of course, the I Am the Walrus ancient papyrus of Gail Burston and Bernard Wadmaker and Netanyahu, which was planted on me in Pittsburgh. Strategists bank on people reacting against empathy with victims and coming over to their strategy when they feel that they themselves will not be able to explain their own behavior. A good example of this is the collective response to the idea that abortion is devil worship. The women say, oh, no, 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 that's not true. I was abused and was acting in self-defense. And so Michael Johnson says, aha, you were the cannibals. And this allows the story to unfold according to the script of Gail Burston. The truth is kept obscure about how the operation operated, and purposely obscured, because the strategists would write things like, the persona is subjected to successive degradations of the X motive. Let's take an example that Whitney Webb would probably relate to. You have a case of online scrutiny of private relations of a deaf old man who has been castrated for putting himself out as bait to prove the program was at work, that they were contracting attack prostitutes to come on to the victim who they tortured. It was a Manson ordeal, and they even used the name Mancine. So they're making movies is written into the script, Manson cinema. And of course, the Sandbagger Alliance denied that that can be perceived. And they put up a front that artificial intelligence and robotics coming from Musk and Peter Thiel want to invade your home. But they want to invade your home too to prove that Jimmy Carrey isn't the walrus. Because the walrus is something that means something to Yoko Ono's tribe, who cast their lot with Gail Burstyn as a collective understanding about survivor integrity, shall we say. And when we understand the rescue, we have to be politically correct. When we understand the war game, we have to be politically correct. Not that whites were sacrificed symbolically by the honorary, the sacred black men who were named as Joseph Goebbels, Nosferatu, Donald Trump, and Yoko Ono. By trick of the UW dialectical machine, those are all sacred, the honorary, the African black men. And Cornel West will, of course, bob his head because sex was involved with a woman from India, which violated the gentlemanliness of Russia, which in turn liberates the Black Panther in Obama for the conquest of the symbol of the war game Maduro Gojo. And all is well in human equity. And they clock this to the AIDS attack as a symbol of what they're proving about human justice, poetic justice. Spike will lead to the rescue. Okay, that's the reality of this situation of moral favoritism rather than consensual sex between informed adults. And you're supposed to understand the Freedom Flotilla as a Black Panther lunch program. The Black Panthers are coming with the flag waving of liberty to protect the beautiful, fairest of Gazan poets, who's 12, from the lecherous old white who wants to preserve her excellence in sensibility. And they have home porno peep. Sheriffs are on the watch for home porno peep. And they emoja. They get Louis Farrakhan to say, we clasp hands with a Jewish girl who made love to Carrey consensually, and say, do we or not sense that he wanted some? So that they can sabotage the idea of rescuing children from substandard detention centers and getting them convalescent into public schools as the sex wish of an ogre who could have saved John Lennon. And that is the mentality that is being cultivated by the people around Jay Epstein, like Amanda Harcourt is a good example. She went along with Will Zell-Brum on Mount Desert Island, who was promoting Joseph Goebbels and talking about AIDS before they released it. And she constructed this deflection alibi about John Lennon and said the collective has decided that this is how it's going to go. In case you ever wonder what I thought the walrus is about. It's that I dared to put investigation into the AIDS attack as above my physical protection from these horrible lectures in genocide pornography, and knew nothing about John Lennon's ghost in the machine, we'll call it. So the brilliant mindset of a postdoctoral counsel from Pitt Philosophy and the Federal Emergency Management Agency held hands with Louis Farrakhan and said, Red Rover, we dare Moscow University to come over. And Louis Farrakhan clucked with glee, and Cornel West bobbed his bobblehead. Because these poachers are people in intellectuosity who refuse to address first points of cause. None of these women were anything other than consensual with me. They were always the same age as me. My love and rapture for poetry is perfectly obvious. The excellence of the fairest of the children in Gaza that I have seen in the sensibilities of poetry is certainly identifiable. So, what is the problem? The problem is that Seattle built momentum for the Charnel House in Gaza. The supernova rave was a symbol of the AIDS attack. Seattle went along with the whole thing. And they want the sheriff to shut me down. They don't want people to understand what the sandbaggers of sandbagger law are covering for, how they went along with it, how they leered as they made me an object of sexual conditioning, neurological abuse, hypnosis, and poaching, while they made secret films to invade my home. This is people who claim to be on a crusade to protect the marginalized and the underrepresented. It's not healthy for women to be evasive of their responsibility. The woman who took me to hair when I was 11 years old brought all of that into my zone of proximal development, was a psychologist, Israeli American, from the University of Pittsburgh, who punished me with Peter Gabriel for taking a stand questioning the toxic sexual conditioning visited upon me by the Veterans Administration, by the rock and roll establishment. I mean, I realized that they put a girl away for sleeping with students in her classes recently. But I also witnessed Mick Ronson pull a child's head to his crotch on the edge of a stage. The issue of Diane Arbus is in the entire media spectrum of the zone of proximal development. And no one is more slanderous and scurrilous in this matter than Vince Irene of the Catholic Worker in Pittsburgh. All the poor kids into Jesus who take law into their own hands as vigilantes worship Vince Irene's ethical pomposity. He brought in Martin Sheen to create a gulag justifying Ripper Hatter's serial abortion by contract on an object that they were using as the walrus. Heather Cox Richardson puts up this storyline about a redacted confidence that leads to certain questions about the son, Hunter Biden, or the son, the married son-in-law of Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, to cover for the fact that she was in on the carrot tape that Vince Irene made with Jaime Carbonell and Andrea Swimmer. Andrea Swimmer was certainly never abused by me. She certainly did abuse me. And they have it set up to make it look like that's a questionable narrative, which puts into perspective what Andrea Swimmer has done for Niva Corporation, which was the gigantic Japanese film corporation who used their role in cinema semiotics to emblazon their pornography with symbols of the pornographic genocide. And we get to be regaled with Alexander Dugin, upon whom be peace, sir, conjuring satanic images of the Western world after he himself made speeches in favor of Donald Trump personally. The populism of October 6th, or January 6th, when they raised the Capitol. You know, nobody values less the idea that he personally shouldn't be free to discuss his concerns without being targeted. But it's scandalous to just invert your own sympathies that way. If we're going to have a talk about abortion being satanic, you need to talk to children about the forces of creation. Who's going to prepare children for the nightmare that we have built with the help of Martin Sheen? I was 11 years old when I saw the movie Rage, starring George C. Scott. Exorcist, Revolution Number 9, these forces impinging on the persona's experience and making ragamuffin kids into Zaligs like Diane Arbus, assimilating the mentality of Donald Trump on Epstein Island. And they put up these horrible images of women being on burbling water like from James Bond country. And what they're doing with 5278 is really something else. They're uploading unredacted Epstein into a gallery of selected images of hotties going down on their boyfriends and so on, so that the sheriff can start duck hunting the young and the restless who've been castrated for poetry. This is insane weirdness from people who refuse to talk to each other about what they consider normal and good. These people attacked me from behind as armed men and laugh about dragging me through glass. Their idea of chivalry was to build momentum for the forces that have wiped out Gaza. And how do they prove it? By demonizing the fact that I fell head over heels in love with the 12-year-old poet. She is a genius, in my humble estimation. This sort of thing comes from Carnegie Mellon University's machine intelligence headquarters. They plug these things into neuroanatomy, flow charts, and say what will happen if we trigger this neuroplasm agent that we implanted with some head trippers from the honky tonks of Panther Hollow Inn in the decade. Way back in days of yore when little Jimmy was being dragged through glass. Oh. I mean, you get these Amanda Harcourt's wannabes saying that if I liked Brixton, where do I see Brixton prison? What I think we need to do is rescue the children and start addressing in a second reconstruction limitations of what we will allow Hollywood to inflict on the zone approximate development of children in public school years. I am not opposed to record labeling. I don't consider it satanic to stand between children's developing minds and films like The Exorcist. And what's unbelievable to me is that the people who are on the parochial establishment are the ones who are promoting the idea that anything goes. It really needs to be discussed, and the women need to man up about their own behavior.